see your point. They might not get each other.
Or worse, they'll hate each other! And if the leader of the Changelings and the Dragon Lord get into a fight, I could be responsible for starting a war that could ruin Equestria as we know it!
God, first the Yaks and now the Changelings. Do dragons get along with anyone? I remember there was some speculation going on when the teaser and synopsis for Triple Threat was announced. People were excited to see it because they thought they were going to get some interesting history between the Changelings and the dragons. A feud or a conflict going back generations, and Spike would somehow have to resolve the issue, which sounds like an interesting idea for an episode. After seeing it, that was clearly not the case. This was basically a story about how Spike was worried that Thorax and Ember weren't going to get along because they're so different. Suddenly, a lot of potential was sidelined for something very basic, and in some cases it made Spike look like an idiot. But does that have an effect on the episode's overall quality? Time to find out. Spike is hosting a friendship ceremony for Ember to help her learn about friendship, which would help settle relationships between ponies and dragons. Unfortunately, he ends up inviting Thorax on the same day, which causes him to worry about the two not getting along. So what's his brilliant plan to keep the two from fighting? Keeping them occupied and hidden from each other. And I'm already shaking my head at how stupid this is. But that's not all, as it appears that the map is now reaching out to whoever it wants to reach out to and tasks Spike with solving a friendship problem, adding even more pressure to his already troubling situation. I think the first problem with the episode is pretty obvious to notice. Spike seems to be an unreasonable idiot with how he handles this problem. Literally, the first instance he's given to solve this situation is when Starlight states how it's possible for them to get along, and he literally does nothing to take her up on it. He thinks they're not gonna get along because of how different they are, which is really contradicting for this show. Didn't we just get an episode about why that's a bad assumption? And at this point, Spike has no reason to believe that they'll hate each other. He just assumes that they're going to start a war which could potentially destroy Equestria. You could say that he's a kid being put into a pressuring situation, but if that's the case, then why would you put a kid in such a pressuring situation? Why would you trust a kid with this level of responsibility? Twilight knows a lot about friendship and pony culture herself, so why can't she do this in Spike's place? I mean, I get that Ember wants Spike's advice specifically, but why doesn't he just tell her that he would like Twilight to speak on his behalf? Like he could be busy with something which would help to justify this decision. And the way the episode progresses from this point onward is so typical and generic. They keep coming up with lame excuses for having Spike go back and forth between Thorax and Ember, and it's not even handled in a unique way. And the setup is so easy to see through that you can easily predict everything that's going to happen from a mile away. And knowing that the episode drags this out for so long just feels irritating. They don't even make the banter between them that humorous or engaging. And because a lot of the episode focuses on it, the dialogue gets repetitive. They even put in this awkward argument with Ember over how Twilight and Starlight look and act the same way, which, yeah, just feels like the leftovers from Fame and Misfortune. And at the start of the third act, Thorax and Ember are able to correct this misunderstanding on their own. The solution to this problem was so obvious that they didn't even need Spike to figure it out. And because Spike was too dumb to be honest with them, they end up losing trust in him. Literally, all Spike had to do was not do exactly what he ended up doing and be honest with Ember and Thorax. You'd think that this would be easy for him to do because of his relationship with them. But the episode realizes that the only way for the plot to work is if Spike was too dumb to figure that out. Even if there was some reason to believe that they wouldn't get along, he still ends up assuming far too much, which is made more apparent when Thorax and Ember point that out themselves. They have every right to be mad at him since he made them both doubt themselves and their abilities to grow as responsible leaders and allies to Equestria. Even if they were trying to make something interesting out of this, the writing feels too predictable to have a relatable sense of tension. The episode's pacing is awkward too, because it revolves around Spike and the girls constantly going back and forth between the same two characters and relying on such obvious writing, it feels so badly put together. Even the name of the episode just doesn't feel right. It's called a Triple Threat, but the only threat in Spike's mind is the one between the dragons and the changelings. Were the Yaks supposed to show up or something? Because this is more of a double threat than a triple threat. There is actually something interesting that happens during the first 2 acts, and that stems from the map calling out to Spike. I know I criticized the idea back when I reviewed Royal Problems, but that was because it was the first time we saw the map doing this, and there wasn't any further context on it at the time. But now that it's happened a second time, I'm starting to see a pattern here. Maybe the map doesn't have to stay connected to just the main 6, because the map is definitely sentient and self-aware. It's actually a living being in some way. It makes you think about all of the interesting ways that the characters and the map can communicate with each other. And even some ideas for new episodes are made possible with this concept. The map can call on the CMC to solve friendship problems, which would build upon their ability to help others. It could send Big Mac to solve a friendship problem, which would develop his social skills. With this new view on the map in mind, there's a new sense of potential behind this concept, and it could lead to some interesting stuff. But even that is accompanied by some problems due to how it's introduced in this episode. The friendship problem was never about Thorax and Ember due to how easily they clear up the misunderstanding, and how easily they get along. They actually learn more from each other than they did Spike. The actual problem was with Spike being unsure about himself over this situation. So the episode is basically telling me that the map never would have called on him if he just stood aside and did nothing. Literally, almost the entire episode is about telling us how dumb Spike was for how poorly he was handling this situation. And that's not a good concept for a story. He was virtually useless in his own episode. I really don't mean to sound cynical about it, but this episode really feels like a retrend of earlier episodes on Spike, and even how he was portrayed in earlier seasons. How his lack of self-awareness ends up fueling the conflict, which contradicts the idea that we're supposed to like him. I do still like Spike, quite a lot actually. But this is another one of those episodes that does not give him proper justice. The only interesting part about the episode is in the 3rd act, where Thorax and Ember communicate with each other. The two already have something in common due to their relationship with Spike, and it's even used in a way that helps them warm up to each other. The conversation that they have about learning from each other is interesting, not just because of their differences, but also because of their similarities. They both want to be stronger leaders and better representatives of their people and culture. They just needed advice that would help them work around their flaws, which is something that they give to each other. Ember was lacking compassion and self-control, while Thorax was lacking confidence and assertiveness. And in the process, the two actually learn more about what they came here for. Ember learned more about friendship, and Thorax learned more about being a better leader. The two are characterized properly during the episode, and the way they come around at the end is pretty fitting. As a matter of fact, this episode would have been so much more interesting if it was just about the two of them. Connecting, learning about each other, helping each other grow, and developing a stronger friendship with Spike. This episode did have a lot of potential behind it, and it could have offered a very interesting story. It does offer a few interesting things, like how Ember adjusts to life in Ponyville, and how Thorax is struggling with his leadership skills, which I think is foreshadowing for a later episode in the season. Even the idea of Spike having a new position in the franchise due to his relationship with these two has a lot of potential behind it. But with the majority of the plot focusing on something so mundane and making Spike look so bad in his own episode, it just feels like an underwhelming experience. The keeping the two separate and hidden from each other to prevent them from fighting story is already predictable on its own, but this episode doesn't do anything refreshing with the concept to make it interesting. I'm guessing that a lot of people will like this episode, and I don't. I wanted to like it, but the problems were too apparent and too annoying that they ended up getting in the way of anything good. Hopefully the next episode will be a much more interesting experience. MisAnthro Pony, over and out.
Thank you.